Sayın hocalarım, sevgili öğrenci arkadaşlarım, değerli konuklar. 9 Eylül Üniversitesi Dilbilim Topluluğu olarak bir konferansta daha karşınızdayız. Bugünkü konuğumuz Orta Doğu Teknik Üniversitesi'nden doçent doktor Martina Gračanin Yüksek. Kendisine bizi kırmayıp davetimizi kabul ettiği için çok teşekkür ediyorum. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Bugünkü konferansın bir özelliği var, o da ilk İngilizce konferansımız olması. Kendini geliştirmek isteyen dil bilimi öğrencilerinin İngilizce konuşmaları takip etme alışkanlığı geliştirmesinin önemli olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Umarız siz de memnun kalırsınız. Sahneyi hocamıza bırakmadan önce kendisiyle ilgili kısa bir bilgilendirmede bulunmak istiyorum. Martina hocamız 98 yılında Zagreb Üniversitesi İngiliz Dili ve Edebiyatı ve İtalyan Dili ve Edebiyatı bölümlerinden mezun oldu. Ardından öğrenimini Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde devam etti ve 2002 yılında Syracuse Üniversitesi'nde dil bilim çalışmaları yüksek lisansını tamamladı. 2007 yılında da MIT'nin dil bilim programında doktorasını verdi. Aynı yıl Orta Doğu Teknik Üniversitesi Yabancı Dil Eğitimi bölümünde göreve başlayan hocamız 2009 yılında yardımcı doçent, 2014 yılında da doçent unvanı aldı. Çalışma alanları kuramsal sözlüzüm, uyum, çoklu dallandırma, çizgiselleştirme ve Slav dilleri. Bugün de bize çoklu dallandırma konulu bir konferans verecek. Sözü daha fazla uzatmadan alkışlarınızla Martina hocamızı.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction and thank you very much for the invitation. I didn't know this was going to be the first English talk. So if you guys have anything that you would like me to repeat or maybe translate, please do ask. As we're going along, the talk will build upon the things that we have covered. So it's important that everybody understands the beginnings. So if you have any questions, I would rather have the questions coming in as I talk rather than wait until the whole thing is over and then ask your question. Is it okay? Am I speaking too fast? Can anybody hear me? Yes? Yes. Okay. So if you have no questions to begin with, I'll start. The title of the talk is The How and Why of Multidominance, and the reason for why the title looks like this is because at the end of the talk we will talk of the constructions that we call coordinated multiple WH questions, in which we see things like how and why, what and when, and things like that at the beginning. So this is why the talk is called the way it is. Now, what you're going to see is going to look complicated, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. So don't worry, there will be a lot of symbols that you won't understand, possibly. Don't let that scare you, because I will tell you everything in plain English as we go. Plain English doesn't do too much to you, for you, right? But then maybe somebody can help me and say it in plain Turkish so everybody understands. So I'm going to start by talking about phrase markers. I'm going to give you several definitions of phrase markers found in regular dictionaries. So a phrase marker is defined as a representation, especially one in the form of a tree diagram, of the constituent structure of a sentence, or a tree diagram or a structural description of the sentence, or the last one, in generative grammar, a representation of the constituent structure of a sentence using a tree diagram or labeled bracketing. So tree diagram is what we call a syntactic tree, right? Phrase marker is a tree diagram. That's what it is. Okay. And we all know what they look like, right? Okay. Now we have a more formal definition of what a phrase marker is and what it should be. And here is one that I give you from the work that you see cited here. And it defines a phrase marker as follows. It is a constituent structure tree, which is a mathematical configuration which consists of N, Q, D, P, and L. And we define each of these elements as follows. The first element, N, is a finite set, a set of nodes. So we all know that trees have nodes, right? A set that contains all the nodes in the tree is defined here as N. Then we have what we call Q, And Q is a finite set, also a set of labels. We know that every node has a label, an N, a VP, an NP, and so on, right? Then we have D, which is a weak partial order from N to N, which is the dominance relation. This means nothing to most of you, does it? I will explain it when we come to that a bit later, but the dominance relation is familiar, right? So we know that things in the tree dominate one another, or at least may dominate one another. Then P is a strict partial order from N to N, the precedence relation. So we also know that the nodes in a tree precede each other, right? John loves his mother, John precedes loves, loves precedes his mother. His precedes mother. And then finally we have L, which is a function from N into Q. Remember, N is the set of nodes, and Q is the set of labels. So this function is the labeling function. Every node has its label, right? So the function that kind of associates the node with a label is what is called L. So what it says really is the tree diagram has nodes, and nodes are labeled nodes, and then there is a dominance relation and there is a precedence relation. Okay? So let's take a look at each of these. So when we say that D is a weak partial order from N to N, it says the fact that it's a partial order, it's, what is meant by a partial order is it captures the fact that not every node in the tree stands in the dominance relation with some other node. Here is what I mean by that. So when we look at this subtree that contains 3 nodes, x, y, and z, we see that z dominates x and it dominates y, but y and x do not dominate one another. So that's why this order is a partial order, because not every 2 nodes can be ordered with respect, can be said to dominate one another. What does it mean that D is a weak partial order? Well, it means that for any 2 nodes that are related by the dominance relation, the relation is transitive, reflexive, and anti-symmetric. Okay? What does that mean? Transitivity means that if x dominates y and y dominates z, then x dominates z. Right? So if I'm the mother of my daughter and my daughter is the mother of her daughter, then I dominate the final daughter. Reflexivity means that for every node x in the tree, x dominates itself. This is something that we usually don't teach in our syntax classes, that actually every node is supposed to dominate itself. But this is something that the mathematical definition of a tree will give you. And then finally we have anti-symmetry. So if we have 2 nodes such that x dominates y, and if it is at the same time true that y dominates x, then it must be true that y and x are the same node. Right? That's what anti-symmetry means. So the dominance relation works like this. It is transitive, it is reflexive, and it is anti-symmetric. And it is built into the definition of what we call a phrase marker. Then we had something like P. P is a strict partial order, which we call the precedence relation, right? Remember that from the couple of slides back? What does it mean that it's a partial order? Again, not every 2 nodes in the tree stand in a precedence relation with one another, right? So if a node dominates some other node, then these 2 nodes are not preceded by one another, nor followed by one another. So if z dominates x and z dominates y, then x precedes y, but z neither precedes nor follows either one of the other 2. Right? So that's why this order is partial order, again, because not every 2 nodes in the tree can be ordered with respect to one another. When we say that P is a strict partial order, what we want to say is the following. We have, unlike the weak partial order that dominance was, we're now talking about a strict partial order, which is transitive, irreflexive, and asymmetric. So the other one was transitive, reflexive, and anti-symmetric. Transitivity is the same as before, so if x precedes y and y precedes z, then x precedes z. Irreflexivity for every node x in the tree, x does not precede itself. Right? So a node dominates itself, but it does not precede itself, because it's hard to see what it would mean for a node to precede itself. And then asymmetry, if x precedes z, and that's true, then if x precedes y, then y cannot precede x. Right? You cannot at the same time precede and follow another element. All right. So that's what we call a phrase marker. That's how people precisely, formally describe a syntactic tree. So why do we need these definitions? We need them in order to see, in order to define for ourselves what kind of syntactic trees our grammars are capable of generating. And this description says, the description that we just went through, says every syntactic tree that a grammar of human language is capable of producing has these characteristics. Here are the conditions that restrict a well-formed phrase marker. So we're still dealing with the question, what is a well-formed tree that a grammar can generate? And here are some of the conditions that people have come up with. These are the symbols I was talking about that not everybody might be familiar with, but that's why I have the English description right here. So the single root condition says that there is one node in the tree such that it dominates all other nodes in the tree. That's the root node. And there is only one of that kind. Okay, so it says for every x, which is a node, so for every node, all other nodes are such that x dominates those nodes. Okay. That's the single root condition. Then we have exclusivity condition. And this is really hard, so I won't even attempt that. But what it says is that if you take any two nodes in the syntactic tree, you will either find that they are related with one another via dominance. Either one will dominate another. Or if that's not the case, then they will be related to one another via precedence. One will precede the other. But what this condition says is it is impossible for a node to at the same time dominate another node and precede another node. Right? And that kind of makes sense, right? A node that dominates x will not precede or follow x. It will dominate. And then we also have another difficult one, which is the non-tangling condition. And it basically says this. Can you see the things that I draw here? So if you have two sisters, X and Y, let's say, and they have some daughters each, then what the non-tangling condition says, if X precedes Y, then everything dominated by X precedes everything dominated by Y. It's really not that complicated when you get down to it. So this is the non-tangling condition. It disallows things like this. The tree branches cannot be tangled with one another. Is my English too... Is it okay? Can you understand me? If you don't understand, raise your hand, let me know. All right. So in Zwicky 1985, there are the same conditions plus some others. Again, conditions on the well-formedness of phrase markers. Some of them are extra to the ones that I already told you about. One such is the single mother condition, which really, in biology, it kind of makes sense to have not more than one mother, at least biologically speaking. In syntax as well, so a node has no more than one mother. Now you remember the talk that I am giving is about multidominance. This is not going to fare very well with what I have to say. Another, the non-tangling condition in Zwicky is defined as follows. So that's what I just explained. And then we have the acyclic condition. No node is the mother of its own ancestor node. So I have a node W, a node Z, and a node X. X cannot be the mother of Z or anything that dominates Z. The unique root condition, we already saw that, right? The root condition, the single root condition, there is only one node without the mother. That was the one node that dominates every other node in the previous definition. And we have the total ordering condition. All sister nodes are linearly ordered with respect to one another. So if you have two sisters, one precedes the other. Okay, now, if it is true that these are the conditions on the well-formedness of phrase markers, and if it is true that mental grammars that we all have in our heads, regardless of the language that we speak, if our grammars can only generate well-formed phrase markers, which is something that we would want to believe, right? We don't want our grammars to create junk. Then it must be that the grammar of any language is not capable of generating any other kind of a phrase marker. Every phrase marker that we have, every tree that our grammar constructs, every tree that our grammar generates, will be such that it has a single root, that every node has only one mother, the branches don't cross, that we have either dominance or precedence relation, and so on and so forth, right? Everything that we just talked about will be the property of a well-formed phrase marker in any language, right? So the conditions on the well-formedness of phrase marker are best understood as being part of universal grammar. It's probably not something that we need to learn through experience. It is probably something that we are born with, and we just, tweak our phrase markers in such a way so as to allow for head final or head initial or, and the other variation of languages that we may be exposed to. But all in all, it's all the same kind of trees that we generate. Now, today, I'm going to try to convince you that actually that may not be true. I use a little bit stronger language on the slide. I will convince you that it's not true.
We'll see.
Yes, of course. I mean, we will see. I might not convince you, but I still will remain convinced myself.
I'm a difficult guy.
So I will try to show you that we have reasons to doubt that the single root condition, the non-tangling condition, and the single mother condition should actually be part of universal grammar. So I'm going to show you that the single root condition may be violated. And here I say at least derivationally, if not representationally. What that means is that at the end of the derivation, the single root condition holds. But in the course of the derivation, you can have as many roots as you want. As long as by the time you're down to one root. So that's the first condition I'm going to try to get rid of. The non-tangling condition is also violable. So in other words, what I'm going to hope to show you is that, if you have an X and a Y that are two sisters, and then you have something here, let's call it A, B, C, and D, right? We will see cases where D will be required to at the same time precede and follow B, which you could only get if you tangle the tree. And of course, that needs to be resolved by the end of the whole thing. But for now, let's talk about it after that. And the single mother condition is violable as well. In other words, I'm going to try to show you that there is maybe something to be gained from believing that a single node can actually have more than one mother. Okay, I will show you examples where the node has two mothers, but that doesn't necessarily mean two, it just means more than one. Okay, there could be three. Okay, now the reason, why am I presenting these? Why am I claiming these outrageous things, right? That we could, in fact, have these horrible trees where we abandon the neat, nice, precisely defined way in which we are supposed to build phrase marking. Well, I'm going to show you that there are several phenomena in grammar, in language, that are simply better explained if we assume multidominance. Okay? If we abandon these conditions. Abandoning these conditions meaning allowing grammar to create or generate phrase markers that are not necessarily compliant with this. Okay? I have a slight problem. I think I opened the wrong presentation. So I might have to stop and switch to the right one when I get to the point. Okay. One such phenomenon is across-the-board movement. Have you ever heard of across-the-board movement? Yes or no?
Yes.
No? Some people over there? No? Okay. So some people have, some people haven't. Good that I have it all described for you and illustrated for you. So ATB movement, across-the-board movement, is abbreviated as ATB. So ATB movement is the kind of movement which refers to the derivation where a single antecedent is associated with more than one gap. So have all of you been introduced to the movement operation? Do you all have an idea about how things work with movement? So you generate a WH phrase, let's say, in the object position, John likes what, and then you move it to the beginning and you end up with what did John like or what does John like. So that's a movement configuration, and what you typically have in movement configurations, you have one WH phrase associated with one gap, right? So what did John see? Gap. In ATB movement, we see a single antecedent associated with more than one gap. Okay? And this usually happens when each of the gaps is in a coordinate structure, in the phrase that has an and in it. Okay? So ATB questions is the name given to questions like this. What did John like and Mary hate? What did John like and Mary hate? This is a well-formed sentence in English, and it is problematic. It is problematic in English for two reasons. First reason is that such questions violate what we call a bi-uniqueness principle. A bi-uniqueness principle. A bi-uniqueness principle says when you have things that move, like antecedents, and you have gaps left by those antecedents, the relationship between the two will be one-to-one. One antecedent, one gap. One gap, one antecedent, right? So that's usually how things work, and you know this violates it because you have one antecedent and you have two gaps. So that's weird. And then also we have a violation here of what we call a coordinate structure constraint. A coordinate structure constraint. And coordinate structure constraint was developed way back when even I wasn't born yet by the guy called Ross, and he, in his dissertation in 1967, found out a whole bunch of phenomena that everybody still refers to. So in every dissertation that you read from formal, that has to do with formal syntax, Ross's dissertation will be cited. So he was a very smart guy. And he was the one who formulated coordinate structure constraint for us for the first time. And the constraint says, in a coordinate structure, no conjunct may be moved. Conjunct are things that are connected with and. So no conjunct can be moved. And no element contained in a conjunct can be moved either. I will give you an example. So here is what coordinate structure constraint was meant to disallow, to prevent, right? So to capture. We know that to A is ungrammatical. You cannot say, what did John eat and butter, right? If you start with the sentence, John ate bread and butter, and now you wonder, it was butter and what that John ate, you cannot say, what did John eat and butter. So this is the coordinate structure, and what you did is you extracted a single conjunct out of it, and that resulted in ungrammaticality. Similarly, in 2b, what did John eat bread and is equally bad, because we did the same thing. We now extracted the second conjunct, not the first one. And we got an ungrammatical sentence again. Now, we said that Ross formulated the constraint by saying you cannot move the conjunct or part of the conjunct, right? So, examples in 3 are meant to show you how we get ungrammatical sentences when we try to extract from the conjunct, not the entire conjunct. So here we have 2 verb phrases coordinated, eat something and drink coffee. And you cannot say, so for example, John ate bread and drank coffee. You cannot from that do something like, what did John eat and drink coffee. That's bad. And the same if we move something out of the second conjunct. So what did John eat a sandwich and drink is equally horrible. So coordinate structure constraint says you don't mess with coordinate structure. You leave things where they are. You cannot move the conjuncts, or you cannot move anything out of the conjuncts either. But there is an exception to coordinate structure constraint, which is precisely what we're talking about, namely ATB movement. ATB movement is exceptionally allowed to violate coordinate structure constraint. So that's why ATB movement is so exotic, because it says, you know, you start with something like this. Is everybody familiar with the kind of thing that we're looking at? We're looking at a phrase marker, right? This here is and this also is an and phrase, right? A coordinate structure. So we have a TP, Mary hates somebody. Here's our WH phrase in its base position. Coordinator, and then another TP, this is another conjunct. John likes somebody, right? Again, who. And then we have C. I omitted details from that analysis. We have T to C movement there, and you know, subjects may be moving. I'm not interested in that, so I simplified it in so that it's obvious what I want to show. So we start with something like this. Notice that we start with 2 instances of who, one in the first conjunct, one in the second conjunct. But then, miraculously, you know, those 2 end up being 1 up here. This is very weird. We all accept ATB movement, we all work with ATB movement, we all say, well, things move ATB, so there are no violations of coordinate structure constraints. But when you see it happening like that, it's really mysterious how that may be. That you have 2 things that just collapse into 1. Okay? There's another thing that is interesting about ATB movement, which is, ATB questions. So questions like, who does John like and Mary hate? They display what is called a single identity reading. A single identity reading, which is really not something you would expect if you have these 2 different things, right? Now let me first tell you what this single identity reading is. So if you have a sentence like this is an ATB question. Who did John slap and Mary kiss? This means there is a person. Tell me for which person is it the case that John slapped that person and Mary kissed that same person, right? So it cannot mean something like this. Tell me who is the person that John slapped, and tell me who is some other person that Mary kissed. That's impossible. So that's why we call it a single identity reading. The 2 WH phrases get associated with the same referent. Now that's pretty weird when you think about the fact that, you know, we have two different who's, right? If you said something like, oh, I forgot, well, there was a party yesterday, and it was a wild party, and I remember, I mean, I had something to drink, so I'm not really quite sure what happened, but I remember John was slapping somebody, and I remember Mary was kissing somebody. So tell me, who did John slap? And also, who did Mary kiss? And that doesn't necessarily mean that there was one person, right? It means there were two different events. One was a slapping event, there was another kissing event, and the participants did not have to be the same. But in A to B question, that's the case. It's the same, always the same interpretation. Now, you might say that the reason why in English you get the single, you might say that single identity reading may be forced in English because English does not allow multiple WH movement. You understand what multiple WH movement is? So WH movement is when a WH phrase moves to the beginning of the sentence. Turkish doesn't have that or doesn't need to have that. English has that. But in some languages, when you have more than one WH phrase, they all move to the beginning. So, you know, get weird languages like my language, Croatian or Russian, where in order to say who loves whom, notice how in an English example, one WH phrase moved to the beginning and the other one stayed in C2. But in Croatian, you have who love, right? So both WH phrases are before the verb, even the object moved. That has to do with the different properties of a language. People say that it has to do with the properties of C, or it has to do with the properties of how many specifiers of the C head a language has. It doesn't matter for our purposes what is behind the...
Croatian is SVO, right? Croatian
is SVO, yes. So this was originally who loves whom. That would be the order like in English. So what happens with A to B questions? What are A to B questions in English? You know, could it be that in languages that allow more than one WH phrase at the beginning, could it be that we have, you know, something like 7, where we move both of these WH phrases and we pronounce them both, right? But this is bad. We don't get that. See that little asterisk there says this is a horrible sentence. It's equally bad as who did John kill and Mary kiss. It's the same. And moreover, in languages like that, when you get a well-formed A to B movement, just like 8, A, so who does Jan love and Vít hate? Who is the person such that Jan loves that person and Vít hates that person? Again, we only get the single identity reading, we do not get the other reading. So it seems that A to B movement is something that works the same cross-linguistically. It doesn't have, it's not related, the properties of these questions are not related to the properties of WH movement or question-making mechanisms from one language to the next. All right. Now,
can you test this in a WH institute language like Turkish, Chinese, or Japanese?
Test what?
I mean, these WH phrases should be moved to spec CP, right?
Well, how would you say this?
In Turkish.
In Turkish. Well, you would have to say something like Ali'nin sevdiğini ve Ayşe'nin nefret ettiğini.
I mean, my question is, can you test this in Turkish? Are you able to test this in Turkish? Or this is just only for WH movement languages?
I don't know. I have never thought about that. So if you said something like, that would be in Turkish and in languages like Turkish, A to B questions look very much like right node raising, which is what we will be talking about next. Okay. So I would say no. I don't think you can test this. I mean, you can, but then you are not sure whether you're testing this or the right node raising.
Because I'm just trying to make some sentences, but they look weird. That's why.
What looks weird?
These kind of data in Turkish.
So what do they look like? Like this kind of data, right?
Yeah. Kim, Ali'yi kim sevdi ve nefret etti?
Kimi kimden nefret etmek çünkü o tekrarlamak zorundasın.
Şöyle yapalım o zaman.
You
Kim
need
sütü
to
içti ve
repeat
çayı
who
döktü? Nasıl geliyor?
In two different cases, like kimi kimden. You need to repeat.
No, I mean, if
Okay,
you
but
have to
let's
use,
make-
Combine them to one who.
if you have to use the same case marker, like kim sütü içti ve çayı döktü.
Nesneyi değiştirmek.
Kim suyu içti ve çayı döktü.
How does it sound like to you? Kim sütü içti ve çayı döktü?
No, let's go with the
Object?
object.
Right. Ali neyi içti ve döktü? This is good.
Ali
Neyi
neyi
içti
içti ve
ve döktü.
döktü.
This is good. Ali neyi içti ve Murat döktü? This is
That's
bad.
what you want. That's what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is just a plain
Bu
coordination.
nasıl?
So
Ali neyi içti ve Murat döktü.
neyi how about this? Neyi Ali içti ve Murat döktü.
Bu nasıl? Neyi Ali içti ve Murat döktü?
Kimi-
This is better, but not
Kimi-
totally perfect. Just question mark.
Kimi Ali
Gördü
gördü
ve Murat ziyaret etti.
Oldu
Okay.
bence.
Not perfect, but question mark.
Not perfect, but question. Well, I mean, you know, it's never, because Turkish is a language that doesn't have WH movement, maybe.
That was my question.
Right? If we believe that, okay, Turkish is a WH in C2 language, which means WH phrases can always stay where they would be if they weren't WH phrases, which is something that neither Croatian nor English allow, at least for the first one, first WH phrases. Now, but WH phrases, of course, can move in Turkish. It's not like they have to stay in C2, so
Or
you can
discursive
say...
reasons, for example, like topic reasons or false reasons.
Right, so we never know whether the movement that takes a WH phrase somewhere else is the same kind of movement that is operative here, or is it some kind of scrambling? You know, things that, you know, things can... On the other hand, Turkish allows things to remain where they are. On the other hand, Turkish allows things to go to places where no other language allows them to go. So, I guess you could construct similar examples, but you would never be sure that you're getting the exact construction that you're getting here.
Because Ali kimi gördü and kimi Ali gördü are different in Martness. One of them is Mart and
Yes,
the other
but
one
this
is
is not the
Mart.
question here, actually. We are talking about across-the-board movement, so you have to have two kinds of different sentences, like Ali kimi gördü ve Murat ziyaret etti. How is this? How does it sound? It's bad, actually. It's bad.
No, but it's bad because you didn't move the WH phrase.
But if you move it, I don't know why, it sounds better. Kimi Ali ziyaret etti ve Murat gördü. This is better. I don't know why. It's weird.
Well, I think
That's why I call it weird.
it's because probably it's because when you move
Scope, maybe.
the WH phrase,
Yeah.
you're doing exactly this,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
In Turkish. This is then Turkish. Turkish with English words would look exactly like this. But when you don't do it, when you leave your first who here, right? Ali kimi gördü, then you would have to delete
Yeah.
the other one. But you cannot delete the WH phrase because it's focused. So you shouldn't be deleting focused material. Maybe that's why, I don't know.
The other syntactic reasons, not ATB.
Yeah.
I just asked this question whether I can use these kinds of tests to find out other syntactic material. That's why. No, it's just a trivial
You know
question.
who works on this? Ataka Ninja works
I know.
on things like
I know.
this. So you should look.
Like slow C.
And right no reason. Okay. So far, everybody happy with this first English talk? Yeah, everybody with me? Okay. So what would, you know, we have these two peculiar properties of ATB movement. We have 2-to-1 reduction of elements, right? The relationship between gaps versus operators is too many to too few, 2-to-1, right? If it were 3, it would be 3-to-1. The operators, there's always only one antecedent, and the gaps may, you know, who did John kiss, Mary slap, and Sue blah blah, right? So all of these properties so that's one property, the weirdness of the weirdness of the fact that we have one antecedent for many gaps. That's one. The other one is we posit these many gaps, but we have a single interpretation for all of them. So that's another thing that's weird. We don't see that otherwise, right? Whenever we have multiple elements, they're free to refer to anything we want, if they are distinct elements. So what would happen, what would help in dealing with these problems is if we could reduce the number of gap positions created by movement to 1. If we could have only one position from which something moved, then at least we would get rid of this one-to-many relation, right? So let's see how we could get that. We have two options as far as I can see. There are probably more, but for the purposes of this talk, I wanted to explore these two. One is we could preserve the single mother condition. Single mother condition says every node has only one mother. But in that case, we would violate coordinate structure constraint and also probably do some other things that would not be very good. We'll see that option in a bit. Or we could violate the single mother condition, and here we're moving into murky waters of multidominance. Okay, we're abandoning phrase markers as we know and love them. But obey the coordinate structure constraint. We would also need to violate the non-tangling conditions, the condition that says phrase markers, branches cannot cross. So let's take a look at the option 1. Option 1 says, let's move only one. What was the option 1, sorry? Yes. So option 1 would look something like this. We would move just one who. Okay, so now we have one gap and one antecedent. But then we have this inconvenient other who left here, so we would have to delete that one. Okay? Let's say PF deletion under the identity.
It's always an escape hatch.
Of WH movement. I'm not going to argue for this.
I know.
Yes, I agree.
Because I used that too, that's why. This is always an escape hatch.
This is one possibility because in the end we get who did John like and Mary hate. Perfect, right? But when you look at that, the first thing that we have is a violation of the focus principle, because the focus principle says let's not delete anything that's focused. I mean, the reason why we focused something is because we didn't want it deleted. WH phrases are inherently focused. So this is not the happiest solution to the problem. Another problem that we have is we have a violation of coordinate structure constraint, right? Because here we have two conjuncts, 1, 2, and we moved a bit of just one of them, right? So we did, what did John eat and drink coffee? That's what we did. The final string is grammatical, but this is probably not how that final string came to be. Okay? This is not how we do it. The other possibility is this. Okay? This is a weird phrase marker. It's actually not a phrase marker. If you remember the definition of what a phrase marker is,
This is not done.
this is not a well-formed phrase marker. But also remember that I told you that I will try to convince you that it actually is. So here is my first touche moment. What this phrase marker has that's different from this one is one little difference. I have only one who. Okay? And that one who, here it is, that one who almost escaped, has one mother right here, right? And it has, oops, another mother here. And it has two sisters, here and here, right?
Stepsisters.
No, they're both sisters. There are no fathers in this tree. You need a father to have a step anything. Okay? So that's the only difference. The rest of this tree is exactly the same as the previous one. Now, how would the ATB question work? It would look like this. And here, we have one antecedent, and how many gaps? One gap. Right? Very nice. But we have a violation of the single mother condition, and we also have a rather unhappy situation with the non-tangling condition. This is the non-tangling condition violation. Now, according to this tree, remember, phrase markers are supposed to have precedence also built into them. So when you know what the phrase marker looks like, you know how it's going to be pronounced. You just go left to right and you follow the principle that everything that is dominated by this will precede everything that is dominated by that. And everything works like a charm. But here, we have the following situation. This verb phrase here should precede this verb phrase here, right? So VP1 precedes VP2 because TP1 precedes TP2, yeah? So if we follow this reasoning, it means that everything which is dominated by this should precede everything that is dominated by this, yes? Now, this contains among other things who, right? It dominates who, at least the trace of who. So we have who precedes hate because who is dominated by VP1 and VP1 precedes VP2. But at the same time, we have who has to follow hate because hate is its sister that precedes it. So we have two statements that are not compatible with one another, right? We cannot have A precede B and also B precedes A. And we also have a sister of the node dominated by one thing being the sister of a node dominated by another thing. That's something that non-tangling condition doesn't allow. So we have a weird phrase mark.
Isn't it the fact that it is not so important because precedence is a relationship which is taken into account in PF? Because, you know, in this syntactic construction, this is just a copy which is preceded by hate.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as it moves upwards, I mean in spec CP, so PF will only see who.
Yeah, okay, so let's make this a little bit more complicated. Who did John talk and Mary gossip about? When you have an about here.
Is it grammatical?
Yeah. Who did John gossip about? Who did Mary talk about? Who did John talk and Mary gossip about?
Okay.
So you might have something here that would create a problem. But in any event, you have a non-tangling condition violation because you have crossing branches. So it might not be the problem for linearization or pronunciation, but it is a problem for the definition of a...
I was just confused because you only say precedence, that's why. Because when I say precedence, I only understand linearization.
Yes, you're right. But precedence is not about linearization in the definition of the phrase marker as we are talking about.
Because it's not narrow sequence.
Well, in 1990s, people... So right now, the reason why Murat Hoca... Murat is raising this question is because these days nobody really believes that you could just look at the tree and know how things are linearized, you know? There is a special linearization procedure, algorithm, whatever. But back in 1990s, people actually believed that precedence is what we call a primitive relation. So it's not something you can read off of C command or some other property of the tree. It's encoded in the tree itself. And this does not encode precedence in itself because we don't know how to. So if there was that about here, so who did John talk and Mary gossip, who has moved, but about remained, we would have a problem on how to linearize that. We know how to pronounce that, but we don't know how to derive this order from this tree. And that's a problem that will remain for some other time when I come. For now, I just want to show you that there are reasons to perhaps believe that these descriptions of phrase markers are too ambitious. They make phrase markers too neat for what we need them to be in real life. So both of these solutions, remember we had one solution which had PF deletion of the who and S coordinate structure constraint violation, and we also had another one which had both single mother condition violation and the non-tangling condition violation. Now, both of these solutions have problems, right? Neither one is perfect. Both violate something. However, the first one says that coordinate structure constraint in English can be violated and you could still get a grammatical sentence. But that's something we have no reason to believe is true. We don't see violations of coordinate structure constraint otherwise. Only here. So perhaps we would like to go for the second option, because the violation of the single mother condition and this violation of the non-tangling condition, okay, yes, there are violations, but there are only violations if you believe in these conditions. Now, why do we believe in these conditions? We believed in these conditions because they predicted stuff very well. They predicted stuff well before we started thinking about A to B movement. So, we have no empirical reason. Do you understand what empirical means? So we don't have any evidence, any real data that tells us that single mother condition has to be true. But we do have evidence that tells us that coordinate structure constraint is probably operative in English. So I am here to propose today that we should maybe abandon single mother condition and the non-tangling condition and go for the multidominant analysis. Why is this called multidominance? Because one node is dominated by more than one series of nodes, right? Another plus, another kind of little perk that multidominance gets, another little perk that multidominance gets us is that the single identity interpretation is no longer a mystery. Remember we said who did John slap and Mary kiss? Has to be one person who was both slapped and kissed?
Because there's only one who, so that's why.
See, that's my brightest student right there. Yes, we only have one entity, one who, and that one who then obviously needs to have a single referent. So, the proposal that I have is to allow multiple dominance, to claim boldly that the single mother condition is actually not a condition on the well-formedness of phrase markers. In fact, a node may have more than one mother. The non-tangling condition, a node dominated by, never mind, this, right, no tangling. And the single root condition may all be done with. The single root condition is, again, I will remind you, it's only violated derivationally because you have two roots at this point in the derivation, at this point, And here you no longer have two roots. Right? After you have put your two conjuncts together, you continue with single root. So at the end, you end up with one root. So in the course of the derivation, we, yes, violate single root condition, but then at the end of it, we come back to single root. Although there are proposals out there, Henk van Riemsdijk has proposed an analysis of the free relatives, so things like, I will eat whatever you give me. Right? So he has an analysis of those structures where he ends up with two separate roots. That's not what I'm not that bold, not that courageous. I'm proposing that we can violate this condition in the course of the derivation as long as at the end we end up with a single root. Okay? Alright, so that's the proposal. And by the way, if at some point this goes blank and I have to move to a different presentation, please don't hold that against me. Okay, so parallel merge. One question that people ask is, okay, so we all know, I hope that you all know that merge, do you all know what merge is? Merge? Merge is the operation, a simplest possible operation, like the operation when you have, when my son was little, he no longer does anything with his hands except this. But when he used to build things with Legos, he would take two Legos and put one on top of the other. That's merge, right? That's the operation that puts two things together, and then once we have those two things together, we take a third thing and put it together, and so on. So this is the operation that takes things and merges them into one. So you have two nodes, and then you merge them, and you have only one at the end. Yeah? So how would merge work? How would these trees be constructed? In what way?
Binary operation.
Sorry?
Binary operation.
Well, you would still want to but yes, binary branching, but you have binary branching even if you don't have parallel merge, right?
Yes.
You always have binary branching, but so the idea was when you take two things and you merge them, then you have created yourself a new node, which is now the next one to be merged, right? And merge would always take the root and merge it with another root. Yeah? But for building multi-dominant structures, you need something slightly different. You again need to put two things together, but the things that are put together are slightly different. Parallel merge is the name that Barbara Chitko gave to something like this. Okay? So you start with three elements: alpha, beta, and gamma. And then we will hear what we're doing is we're making this gamma the sister of beta, and at the same time the sister of alpha. Like this. This is like our who, and this is like, and this is it. What happens next is labeling. Now Barbara had the idea that it would be the element this is not multiply dominated that projects, but I think it could be either one. So what gives the label to this node? It's just like it always is. It's either alpha or it's beta, whichever projects. And what gives the label to this node? Either beta or gamma, depending on what projects. This is not alpha or beta, alpha or gamma. Okay. Now, Barbara Chitko said, if you assume a theory of merge, as Chomsky did in 2001, that's, I think, derivation by phase, what Chomsky says, he says, well, we have external merge when you build things from scratch, and then you also have internal merge when you move things. So internal merge would be movement. And she says, well, that allows us, to merge things that have already been merged, to be merged again. So why not have it here? This gamma has already been merged with beta, so why could it not be merged with alpha as well?